The war room aboard the Eternal Ascendancy was carved from obsidian black alloy, its walls lined with the star maps of 400 conquered systems. Fleet Commander Varek'Shan stood at the center of it, perfectly still, the way his kind always stood when they were thinking deeply, like a statue waiting to remember it was alive. He had been studying the humans for 11 months. That was, by any measure, an embarrassing amount of time. The Vel'Thara did not linger on assessments. They were the oldest spacefaring civilization in the known galaxy, older than the Charati Collective, older than the Myrath Dominion, older than the ash cloud remnants of whatever the screen had once been before Varek'Shan's grandfather had finished with them. The Vel'Thara assessed. They decided. They moved. 11 months. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Elosa, had stopped asking questions about it after the 4th month. She had learned, in the particular way that survivors learned things, that when Varek'Shan went quiet on a subject, pressing him was not a career-preserving decision. But tonight she watched him from the doorway of the war room, and she could see it again, that stillness that was different from his usual stillness. Not the stillness of a predator waiting. Something else. Something she did not have a clean word for in any of the 6 languages she spoke fluently. The Council has sent another message, she said. I know. They want a deployment timeline. I know that too. She stepped into the room. The star maps shifted around her, responding to her movement, drawing the contested outer rim into sharper resolution. The human systems glowed a pale amber, the color the Vel'Thara cartographers used for civilizations not yet catalogued as threats. It was the color they had used for every species before conquest. It was, traditionally, a temporary color. It had been amber for 11 months. Commander, Elosa said carefully. The humans are a Type 2 civilization. Barely. Their fastest ships take 3 weeks to cross what we cross in 2 days. Their weapons are kinetic and plasma-based, nothing we haven't absorbed from a dozen lesser species. Their population across all colonies numbers fewer than 40 billion. The Charati had 400 billion and we pacified them in 8 years. Varek'Shan said nothing. By every metric in the assessment catalogue, she continued, they should be a Category 3 engagement. Moderate resistance, acceptable losses, full integration within a decade. He turned from the star map then, and looked at her with those pale silver eyes that his species had evolved over millennia of deep space navigation, eyes that were very good at finding things that didn't want to be found. Pull up the Keplan Report, he said. She hesitated only a fraction of a second. Then she pulled it up. The Keplan Report was named after Reconnaissance Officer Keplan, who had been part of the first Vel'Thara observation team deployed to the edges of human space 7 years ago. It was 43 pages long. Most reconnaissance reports on pre-contact civilizations ran between 8 and 12 pages. The Council had flagged it as excessive and filed it in a secondary archive. Varek'Shan had read it 9 times. Page 31, he said. Elosa scrolled. The text appeared in the amber glow of the war room, clinical and precise the way all Vel'Thara documentation was, and yet, even through the formality of the language, something in it made her read slower than she intended. Subject civilization demonstrates an anomalous relationship with mortality, the report read. Where other observed species develop psychological frameworks to minimize or ritualize the awareness of death, thereby preserving functional stability, humans appear to have developed in the opposite direction. They are aware of death constantly. They discuss it, depict it in their art, prepare for it, mourn it communally, and in documented cases, deliberately seek proximity to it. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, they do not appear to be paralyzed by the awareness. The precise psychological mechanism by which they convert mortality awareness into motivation rather than dysfunction has not been successfully modeled. Elosa read it twice. That could mean many things, she said. It could simply be a primitive coping mechanism. Underdeveloped emotional regulation. Keep reading. She scrolled further. In reviewing historical military records obtained through long-range signal interception, this officer notes a pattern that resists standard classification. Human military defeats, including catastrophic ones, including defeats involving near-total loss of personnel and equipment, do not consistently produce the expected outcome of strategic withdrawal or capitulation. In numerous historical cases, defeat appears to have produced increased combative motivation in surviving units. The interplay between loss and escalation in human psychology suggests a feedback loop with no clear upper limit that this officer has been able to identify. No upper limit. The war room was quiet. He recommended we avoid direct engagement, Elosar said slowly. He recommended we avoid direct engagement, Varek'Shan confirmed. The council called it the nervous report of an officer who had spent too long alone in deep space. They retired him early. He paused. He filed a second report 2 years later, from retirement, unprompted, at his own expense. 3 pages. I've read that one 14 times. What did it say? Varek'Shan turned back to the star map. The amber glow of human space painted half his face in pale gold. It said, and I want you to consider that this is a Vel'Thara officer writing this, a species that has never, in 4,000 years of expansion, encountered anything we could not eventually break. He stopped. Started again. It said, I have studied the records of every species we have ever faced. I have found the point in each of them where they stopped. Where the will broke, and the math took over, and they made the rational decision. I cannot find that point in humans. I have been looking for 3 years. I do not think the point exists. Elosar stood very still. Outside the war room, through 3 feet of reinforced hull, 400 Vel'Thara warships held formation in the dark, the finest fleet ever assembled in the history of their civilization, waiting for one word from one man. Varek'Shan stared at the amber glow of 40 billion humans who did not yet know he was here. Run me the casualty projections again, he said quietly. Not the council's projections. Mine. The projections were not new. He had run them 37 times over 11 months, adjusting variables, stress-testing assumptions, feeding in new intercept data as it arrived from the observation drone stationed at the edges of human space. The numbers changed slightly each time, a percentage point here, a fleet engagement modifier there, but the shape of them never changed. The shape of them was what kept him awake in the long artificial nights of deep space. Elosar watched the holographic columns assemble themselves above the war room table. Casualty estimates. Engagement timelines. Resource expenditure curves. The mathematics of conquest rendered in cool blue light. Phase 1 looks acceptable, she said, reading carefully. Initial engagement, outer colonies. 17% fleet attrition. Within tolerance. Keep going. Phase 2. Core system engagement. She paused. 29%. That's higher than the council model but still within Phase 3. She found it. Read it. Read it again. This can't be right. I've checked it 11 times. 44% attrition by Phase 3? She looked up. Commander, we've never sustained losses above 30% in any campaign in recorded Vel'Thara history. The Charati pushed us to 26 and that was considered a generational wound. 44% would take us a century to rebuild from, Varek'Shan said. Yes. Your model must have a flaw. An error in the resistance escalation variable. That's what I thought the first 8 times. He moved to the table, enlarged the Phase 3 column with 2 fingers. The error isn't in the math. The math is describing something real. Something that happens to human resistance capability over time that doesn't happen with any other species we've encountered. He pulled up a secondary overlay, a graph that tracked resistance intensity across the 3 phases, plotted against time. Every other species the Vel'Thara had ever faced showed the same basic curve, a spike of initial resistance, then a gradual decline as losses mounted, infrastructure collapsed, and the population made the cold rational calculation that survival mattered more than sovereignty. The human line didn't curve downward. It curved upward. They get worse, Elosar said softly. Not a question. She was staring at the line the way someone stares at something they wish they hadn't seen. The longer the engagement runs, the more dangerous they become. Not because their technology improves, it does, but that's not the primary driver. Because of something that happens to them psychologically over the course of a prolonged conflict. He traced the line with one finger without touching the display. Keplan called it consolidation. He meant something specific by it, the point at which a human population stops experiencing a war as a crisis and starts experiencing it as a defining condition. Once they reach that point, the normal pressure mechanisms stop working. Every species reaches accommodation eventually. Not this kind. He straightened. When the Charati reached accommodation, they sued for terms. When the Myrath reached it, they fragmented, outer systems surrendered independently, the core worlds held out another 30 years, but they held out in isolation, each one alone. That's how species break. You separate the parts and the parts lose the will that the whole had. He looked at the upward curving line. Human history has a different pattern. When you separate the parts remember the whole. They don't fight for survival. They fight for each other. For people they've never met, on planets they've never seen, who share nothing with them except the same species designation. The war room was quiet for a long moment. That's irrational, Elosar said. Completely. No strategic civilization fights that way. No, Varek'Shan agreed. They don't. He walked slowly around the table, the blue light of the projections moving across him. Outside, his fleet held its silence in the dark. 400 ships. The best crews the Vel'Thara had ever trained. Soldiers who had never lost a war, never been asked to, never had to develop a psychology for what losing felt like because the mathematics of Vel'Thara power had always made losing a theoretical concept rather than a lived experience. He thought about that. He thought about what it meant to have never lost. And then he thought about a species that had lost, repeatedly, catastrophically, across thousands of years of its own history, that had been invaded and burned and broken and occupied and nearly destroyed more times than the Vel'Thara had fought wars in total, and had every single time, without exception, without one single permanent exception, come back. There's a signal, Elosar said suddenly. She was looking at a secondary console, her posture changed. Commander. There's a signal coming from inside the perimeter. He was at her side in 3 steps. The signal was narrowband, short range, and entirely too precisely aimed at his flagship to be accidental. Someone had known exactly where to point it. His fleet was running full emission blackout, had been for 6 weeks, which meant whoever had sent the signal had calculated his position from something other than active sensors. Had worked it out. The translation matrix assembled itself, pulling from 11 months of intercepted human communications, and the message resolved into clean Vel'Thara standard as if someone had taken the time, had taken considerable time, to compose it correctly. It read, Fleet Commander. We have known you were here for 9 weeks. We have not responded until now because we wanted you to finish your assessment. We believe you are a thorough individual and we wanted you to have complete information before we spoke. We are prepared to discuss terms. We are also prepared not to. We would like to know which you prefer. We ask because we are not the same as the species you have faced before, and we think you already know that, and we think the conversation will go better if we begin from honesty rather than pretense. We will wait. Varek'Shan read it 3 times. Not because he hadn't understood it. Because he was looking for the thing underneath the words, the tell, the desperation dressed as calm, the fear performing as confidence. He was very good at finding that. He had found it in the communications of 41 species across 4,000 years of Vel'Thara expansion. He could not find it here. They knew, Elosar said. Her voice had changed in a way she probably wasn't aware of. For 9 weeks. They watched us watching them and they said nothing. They were waiting for me to finish, Varek'Shan said. What does that mean? He looked at the message for a long moment. Then he looked at the upward curving line on his casualty projection. Then he looked at the amber glow of human space on the star map, 40 billion people living their lives in the light of their own suns, unaware that this conversation was happening, trusting without knowing they were trusting that whoever spoke for them in this moment would say the right thing. He thought about what it meant to carry 40 billion people in a narrowband signal. He thought about what kind of species produce someone capable of that. It means, he said slowly, that I have been studying them for 11 months. He pulled up the response console. And they have been studying me. He did not respond immediately. That was deliberate. The Vel'Thara had a concept, untranslatable in most languages, though Keplan had attempted it in his second report, that described the particular kind of power that lived in a pause. Not hesitation. Not uncertainty. The conscious, controlled withholding of response as a form of communication in itself. Every Vel'Thara commander learned it in the first year of officer training. It was one of the first things that separated the ones who would lead from the ones who would follow. He held the pause for 6 minutes. Then he typed, "We prefer the conversation." He sent it and stepped back from the console and waited. The response came in 40 seconds. Which meant they had been waiting, watching the channel, ready, and had still taken 40 seconds. Had made him wait just long enough to make a point without making it loudly. "Good," it read. "We thought you might. We have prepared someone to speak with you. She has been prepared for this conversation for 3 years. We ask that you extend her the same honesty you would want extended to you. Her name is Dr. Yael Okafor. She is not a soldier. We thought that was important for you to know." Varek'Shan stared at the last 2 lines for a long time. Elosar, reading over his shoulder, said nothing. She had run out of things to say approximately 4 minutes ago, which was itself a notable event in the 8 years they had served together. "Not a soldier," she finally said. "They sent a civilian to open negotiations with the fleet that could end their civilization," Varek'Shan said. "Think about what that means. It could mean they're understating the situation. Performing calm they don't have. It could." He looked at the message. "Or it means they are not performing anything. It means they looked at this moment, this specific moment, the most dangerous moment in the history of their species, and they chose to begin it with honesty instead of armor." He paused. "Which is either the most naive thing I have ever encountered, or the most confident." He opened the channel. The face that assembled itself on the war room's communication display was not what he had expected, though he could not have said precisely what he had expected. A human female, middle-aged by their biological standards, with dark skin and close-cut grey hair and eyes that were doing something he had learned to read in 11 months of studying human communication, the thing their eyes did when they were frightened and had decided to proceed anyway. Not the absence of fear. The presence of it, acknowledged and set aside. She looked at him the way he imagined she might look at a very large, very complex problem she had chosen to spend her life solving. "Fleet Commander Varek'Shan," she said. Her pronunciation was not perfect, but it was close enough that he understood immediately she had been practicing his name specifically. "Thank you for agreeing to speak. You knew my name," he said. "We've known quite a lot about you for some time." A pause. "You've been thorough." "So have we. You said you were prepared to discuss terms." "I did. What terms does a civilization offer when it is facing 400 Vel'Thara warships?" She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone searching for an answer. The quiet of someone deciding how honest to be, and then deciding to be entirely honest. "That depends," she said, "on what the civilization wants the outcome to be." "Enlighten me." "We've studied your history, Commander. All of it that we could access. 41 species. For 1,000 years. She held his gaze through the display in a way that his own junior officers frequently failed to do. "You've never lost a war. You have also never, in 4,000 years, produced a single lasting alliance. Every species you've encountered has either been conquered or avoided you entirely." She paused. "That seems lonely." The war room was absolutely silent. Varek'Shan was aware of Elosar beside him, perfectly still, and he was aware of his own breathing, and he was aware that this human woman had just said something to him that no one, no diplomat, no conquered ruler, no species representative in 4,000 years, had ever said to the Vel'Thara. "You came to negotiate," he said carefully, "and you opened with that." "I came to be honest," she said. "You told us you prefer conversation. Conversation requires honesty, or it's just two parties performing at each other." A slight shift in her expression, something that his translation matrix flagged as dry, as the particular human expression of finding something painful and choosing to name it anyway. "We've done enough of that on our own planet to know it doesn't work." He studied her, pulled every thread of 11 months of observation through his mind and looked for the angle, the strategy, the manipulation dressed as candor. "What do you want, Dr. Okafor?" "To show you something." She reached off-screen and brought back a physical object, a tablet, thin and worn at the edges in a way that suggested years of use. "This is a record. Every war humans have ever fought. Every one. Going back as far as our written history reaches." She set it down in front of her. "We gave it to you not because we're proud of it. We're not. We gave it to you because we wanted you to understand what we are before you decided what to do with us." She looked at him directly. "We are very, very good at war, Commander. You've seen that in your projections. Yes, we know about your projections. We've been modeling them alongside you. We know what Phase 3 looks like. We know what it costs you." Her voice was steady and quiet and carried the particular weight of someone saying something true. "But we are also, and I need you to believe me when I say this, because everything depends on it, exhausted by it. We have been fighting each other for all of recorded history. We are tired in a way that I'm not sure translates. And when we look at the galaxy and see that the first civilization to find us intends to continue the pattern," she stopped, gathered herself. "We don't surrender easily. You know that. But we also don't want to fight you. We want something that has never happened in 4,000 years of your history." "And what is that?" She looked at him across the impossible distance of space, one human woman and the weight of 40 billion people behind her eyes. "We want you to be the first," she said simply. The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. It had a different texture. Varek'Shan felt it settle into the war room around him like something physical, like pressure changing before a storm. He thought about 4,000 years. He thought about 41 species and the ash cloud remnants of the Scareen and the fragmented ruins of the Myrath Dominion and the long, cold, perfect, unbroken record of a civilization that had never lost and had never, not once, been offered the thing this woman was offering him now. He thought about the upward curving line on his casualty projection. He thought about Keplan, retired early, filing unprompted reports at his own expense, unable to find the breaking point because the breaking point did not exist, and he understood finally, in this moment, what had frightened that good and careful officer so deeply. It wasn't the strength. It was the choice. Humans could fight without a ceiling. They had demonstrated that across all of their brutal, magnificent, exhausting history. But they were sitting across from him right now, choosing not to, choosing something harder, something that required more courage than any war they had ever survived, and the reason it made him nervous, the reason it had always made him nervous, was not that they were dangerous. It was that they were dangerous and they were reaching past it. He looked at Dr. Yael Okafor, who was frightened and had set the fear aside, who had practiced his name, who had called for 1,000 years of unbroken conquest lonely to the face of the man who embodied it. He looked at Elosar, who was watching him with an expression he had never seen on her in 8 years of service. He looked at the amber glow of human space on the star map behind him, that temporary color, meant for civilizations not yet catalogued as threats, and he made a decision that would take historians 100 years to fully understand. He reached forward and changed the color. Not to red. Not to the gray of occupied systems or the white of absorbed civilizations. He chose a color the Vel'Thara cartographers had never used before in 4,000 years of mapmaking, because there had never been a reason to use it. A deep, steady blue, the color, he realized distantly, of the planet on her screen behind her, visible through a window she hadn't thought to close. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what the first step looks like." And for the first time in 11 months, the amber light in the war room changed.